There's a question that gets asked about the first chapter of One Piece, right at the start, before you know anyone's name properly. What is the One Piece? And here we are, well past chapter 1100, deep into the Elbaf arc, and nobody has actually answered it. Nearly 30 years, same question, still open, which is a big part of why this fandom theorizes the way it does. When a story leaves that much room, people fill it, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes with something so daft you have to admire the commitment. So tonight we're going through 100 of them. Some are proper lore, quietly confirmed in a corner of the manga most people skipped. Some are Reddit posts from 10 years ago that turned out to be right. And a few are absolute nonsense that I'm including because they made me laugh. Quick note before we start. I'll be pulling from the manga, so there's Elbaf material. In here the anime hasn't reached yet. There's no running order to any of this and nothing at the end you'd be missing out on. It just goes until it stops. Subscribe if you fancy it. We're starting with a man being shot in the middle of a sentence. Professor Clover, Onohara, on the phone to the world government, explaining what his people had spent their lives working out. And he gets to the part where he's about to say the name of a kingdom that existed 900 years ago, and a marine sniper puts a bullet in him before the word comes out. That's it. That's the whole scene. Every single thing in this first stretch hangs off that interruption, because the story has spent 1,000 chapters circling a word that got cut off mid-air. Theory number 1, the Great Kingdom was destroyed for its ideas, not its army. This one's practically confirmed, but I think people underrate how strange it is. Clover's argument was that the kingdom had to have been erased because of what it believed, not what it could do militarily. 20 countries went to enormous lengths to make an entire civilization unmentionable. You don't do that to a place that was simply strong. You do it to a place that was persuasive. And the thing that always sits with me is that the world government's response to a man saying this out loud was to prove him correct in real time. He said, "You erase people for their ideals at a Turin," and they erased him for having one. No notes. Theory 2. The D stands for Dawn. The oldest theory in the fandom, and still the most popular. Every character carrying the initial seems to be walking towards some kind of new beginning, usually violently, and Dawn as a word turns up everywhere, around Luffy specifically. His home island is Dawn Island. The very first chapter is called Romance Dawn. Oda's original one-shot before the series existed was also called Romance Dawn. He's been standing next to this word for 28 years, whistling. Theory 3. The D clan are the people of that kingdom, or their descendants anyway. Their allies, the remains of Joy Boy's side of the war. Emu has referred to the D as an old enemy of the world government, which is a fairly enormous thing to just drop into conversation, and it lines up with a pattern fans noticed years earlier. Everyone with the initial has some kind of friction with the government, whether they're a pirate, a revolutionary, or a marine who technically works for them and clearly can't stand it. Garp being the funniest example. Theory 4. The poneglyphs were a relay, not a library. Nefertari Lily is one of the 20 founding monarchs, and then she vanishes from history, and 800 years later, it turns out the indestructible stone tablets were scattered around the world under her involvement. So the theory is that this wasn't archiving. It was a message deliberately thrown forward in time to somebody who didn't exist yet, chopped into pieces and hidden on opposite ends of the planet, in a script nearly nobody can read, specifically so that only a person capable of sailing the entire world could assemble it. It's a treasure hunt built as a filter. Whoever designed it wasn't looking for a scholar, they were looking for a sailor. Theory 4.5. Related and slightly grim. Queen Lily's letter is described by Cobra personally as the thing that calls on the Nefertari family to raise the flag that heralds the world's eventual dawn, which means the single most important document in the world is not a poneglyph at all. It's a handwritten note from a woman, kept in the Nefertari family ever since. The theory people run with is that Lily didn't defect for tactical reasons. She saw what the Alliance intended to do after the war was won and objected, and the objection is what's written down. Theory 5. The war never ended. Vegapunk's broadcast landed this one, and it's still the piece of information I find hardest to hold in my head. The ancient weapons were used during that war, and their use raised sea levels across the entire world by 200 meters. That's not a battle, that's a geological event, and his conclusion was that because the weapons still exist and were never destroyed, the conflict has not formally concluded. It's been paused for 8 centuries. Everyone currently alive was born during a ceasefire nobody told them about. Theory 6. Some drowned cities in the series are collateral from that one moment. Fun follow-on. If the water rose 200 meters in a short window, then a lot of places we visited weren't built underwater or on mountains for aesthetic reasons. They were normal places that got submerged. Fishman Island sitting 10,000 meters down, Shandora ending up on a chunk of land that got fired into the sky. Whole civilizations that we met as curiosities are actually just the high ground and the survivors. It reframes the map completely. The world isn't fantastical, it's damaged. Theory 7. Joy Boy and Nika were 2 different people. For years the fandom treated these as one figure with 2 names, and chapter 1114 quietly went, no, actually. Vegapunk describes Joy Boy as a man from an advanced kingdom who could fight with a stretchy body, just like the legendary sun god Nika of Elbaf. Just like. Comparison, not equivalence, which means Nika was already a legend when Joy Boy was alive, and Joy Boy was compared to him the way you'd compare a footballer to someone from a previous generation. That single word rewrote about a decade of theorizing overnight. Theory 8. The giant straw hat belonged to Nika. The follow-on from that is neat, though. If Nika is specifically the sun god of Elbaf, land of giants, then Nika was probably a giant. And there is a straw hat sitting in a freezer under Maria Joie that is far too big for any human, which fans stared at for years without a good explanation. Suddenly there's a very good explanation. Emu keeps it. Not destroys it, keeps it. There's something almost personal about that, and I don't think it's a trophy. I think it's the kind of thing you hold on to when you can't quite let something go. Theory 9. Roger got there too early. The Roger pirates reached the final island, found what was waiting and laughed. And then Roger said they'd arrived too soon. Not the wrong people, the wrong moment, which implies the treasure is time-locked rather than person-locked, and that whatever's there needs the world to be in a particular state before it means anything. A lot of theories try to guess what the treasure is. Fewer ask why it has a schedule. Roger was arguably the most capable person who ever lived in that world, and he still had to go, not yet, and go home and get executed. That's a bleak little detail when you sit with it. Theory 9.5 if you'll allow it, because it doesn't quite deserve its own number. There's a persistent idea that the Roger pirates didn't just find something, they made a decision. The crew disbanded almost immediately afterwards. Roger turned himself in. Rayleigh retired to a beach and spent the next 20 years drinking. Crocus went back to a lighthouse. That is not the behaviour of people who found treasure. That's the behaviour of people who found out something and agreed, without much discussion, to sit on it and let the world catch up. Every single one of them kept the secret for 2 decades, under interrogation, under torture in some cases, and not one of them broke. Whatever's at the end of that journey, they all independently concluded it wasn't theirs to spend. Theory 10. Every arc is the Void Century in miniature. This one's more of a reading than a theory, but it's held up remarkably well. Look at the shape of a one-piece arc. A powerful group takes over a place, rewrites what the locals are allowed to say about themselves, and punishes anyone who remembers the truth. Alabaster, Skypiea, Water 7, Dress Rosa, where an entire population was made to forget people existed. Wano, where the country was told its own history was shameful. Every one of them is a small model of what was done to the Great Kingdom. and Luffy keeps solving it at the local scale without ever realising he's rehearsing. And here's a fun detail that sits underneath all of this and doesn't get discussed enough. The Nefertari family never moved to the Holy Land. 20 kingdoms formed the alliance that won that war. 19 of those royal families packed up and relocated to Mariejois, where their descendants became the celestial dragons, complete with the bubbles and the attitude and the general sense that other people are furniture. One family declined. The Nefertari stayed in Alabaster in the desert and kept ruling it as normal monarchs ever since. And the 5 elders in the series explicitly comment on this. Vivi's family made a decision at the founding of the world order and then quietly lived with it for 4/5 of a millennium while everyone else was upstairs, which recontextualizes Alabaster enormously, by the way. Cobra isn't a nice king in a small country. He's the last remaining descendant of a founding power who refused the promotion. There's also the matter of the appointed time, which is a phrase that keeps surfacing in odd corners. The enormous ship Noah has been sitting at the bottom of the sea near Fishman Island, waiting for it. Roger reached the end and decided it hadn't arrived, and nobody in the story has ever defined what it actually is. The theory that gets me is that it isn't a date at all. It's a condition, a state the world has to be in, or a person who has to exist. And until then, the whole thing simply sits there, being patient, which is a fairly haunting way to build a plot device. Somewhere there's a boat that has been ready for 8 centuries, and the poneglyphs have a hierarchy that's worth laying out, because a lot of people conflate them. There are the ordinary ones scattered about with historical fragments on them. There are 4 road poneglyphs, which each give a bearing and only make sense together, because you need all 4 to triangulate the final island. And then there's the Rio poneglyph, the master document, sitting at the destination, which the other stones are essentially footnotes to. So the structure is, you cannot read the answer until you have physically crossed the entire world twice. And even then, you need a living translator from a family the government has been hunting for generations. Whoever designed that filter was not messing about. One more, and this one's small, but it rattles around in my head. Robin can read them because a group of scholars on a small island taught an 8-year-old, and then the island was burned with all of them on it. That's it. That's the transmission. An 800-year chain of preserved knowledge came down to whether one child got on a boat. The government's plan was working perfectly. They'd found the last people who could read the record and were in the process of removing them, and they missed by one. And the one they missed was the least physically threatening person on the island. Sort of like how the enormous historical events in real life often hinge on some administrative accident. A ledger that didn't get burned, a letter that went to the wrong address, centuries of very deliberate policy, undone by a marine who couldn't bring himself to shoot a kid. And that's the thing about Ohara that I keep coming back to. When you first watch it, it plays as a tragedy about books, scholars, a library, a burning tree. It's only later, once you've seen the pattern repeat on 5 other islands, that you realise it wasn't a tragedy about books at all. It was the series quietly telling you what kind of story you'd signed up for, not a treasure hunt, an argument about who gets to write things down. Anyway, let's leave the ancient past for a bit and talk about the person currently sitting on top of all of it. There's a room at the top of the world with a chair in it that nobody is allowed to sit in. That's the empty throne. It sits in Mariejois. It's been vacant for 800 years by official account, and the world's most powerful people gather around it and speak as though it's furniture. And then one night, after everyone's gone home, somebody walks in and sits down. That image did more damage to the fandom's collective sanity than any fight in the series. Theory 11. Emu knew Joy Boy personally, not knew of, knew. Emmet, the enormous ancient robot on Egghead, recognises Luffy and starts talking to him as though picking up an interrupted conversation. Emu, separately, has looked at Luffy's wanted poster and used the same name. Two beings who were there at the end of the old world, both of whom, independently, clocked the same modern teenager. That's the sort of thing that ought to be a wild theory, and is instead just sort of on the page. Theory 12. They were siblings. This is the one gathering the most momentum, and it's built out of small pieces rather than one big reveal. The bloodline material coming out of Elbaf, the way Amet apologizes for not being able to make Joy Boy king, and the theory that somebody else got the crown instead. If two people from the same family had opposing ideas about how the world should work, and one of them won and spent every year since making sure the other one's name couldn't be said out loud, that's an extremely one-piece shape for a story to have. Family disagreements in this series never stay small. Theory 13. The Judas reading. A theory that did the rounds on X, and it's one of those ones where you go, that's either nothing or it's everything. The argument is that Joy Boy is written with a fairly deliberate messianic shape, and Immu occupies the betrayer position. The interesting bit isn't the parallel itself, it's the practical claim attached to it, which is that Immu obtained the ancient weapon Uranus from Joy Boy directly rather than taking it. Given that Joy Boy apparently wanted the weapons preserved for the future, handing one to the wrong person would be the single worst decision in world history. Which honestly is very much the sort of thing a man nicknamed Joy Boy would do. Theory 14. The immortality operation. Simple mechanical explanation for a very old shadowy person. The Op fruit can grant eternal life at the cost of the user's own. It exists in-universe, it's been explicitly stated. Doflamingo wanted it for exactly this purpose. So the least exotic explanation for Immu's longevity is that somebody, centuries ago, spent their life to buy someone else's. What I like about this theory is how unglamorous it is. No mystical curse, no divine bloodline, just a surgery. Theory 15. Immu is tied to Nefertari Lily by blood. Cobra asks about Lily and gets killed for it, essentially. The letter she left behind is questioned by Immu personally, who asks what it says, which is an enormous amount of weight to put on one document. So the theory goes that Lily wasn't just a founding monarch who wandered off, she was family, and her defection is the wound this whole thing is built around. Theory 16. Immu painted the mural. This one came from a fan on X, and it's genuinely lovely. There's a mural carved into the fossilised bark of the treasure tree Adam on Elbaf, depicting the war, and the theory is that it wasn't made by historians or survivors. It was made by Immu a long time ago as a young person, recording what happened while it still hurt, which would mean the most complete surviving account of the Void Century was drawn by the person who then spent the rest of recorded history erasing it. I have no idea if it's true, I love it anyway. Theory 17. Uranus fires from above. We've seen a country get deleted from the map by something that came down out of the sky, and we've seen Vegapunk's work on the Mother Flame produce enormous energy from an unexplained source. Put those together, and the theory is that Uranus isn't a ship or a person, it's positioned above the planet, and it's been up there the whole time, which would mean the ancient civilization had orbital capability, and that the current world is running on the leftovers of technology it can no longer build. Theory 18. The 5 Elders' fruits are a statement. Each of the 5 Elders turned out to have a mythical Zoan drawn from a different real-world mythological tradition. Buddhist, Greek, Norse, and so on. The theory reads this as authorial commentary rather than coincidence. The people who conquered the world and rewrote its history literally embody its myths. They didn't just take the kingdom, they took the stories, which is a fairly pointed thing to do in a series where a banned folk hero is the main character's whole deal. Theory 19. The bubbles. Celestial dragons wear glass helmets full of air because they refuse to breathe the same air as commoners. That's the stated reason, and it's almost certainly the real one. But there's a persistent fan theory that it's biological, that they descend from somewhere with different atmosphere, or that centuries of isolation have made them genuinely fragile. I don't buy it for a second. I mention it because I think the boring answer is far more damning. They're not sick, they're just like that. Theory 19.5. The Holy Land's name is worth a second of attention. Mary Jawais sits on top of the red line, physically above every other nation on the planet, reachable only through a route the government controls. Which means the world's geography does the government's argument for it before anyone speaks. Nobody has to be told the hierarchy. They can see it from the beach. The theory is that this placement was chosen at the founding as propaganda made of rock, and that it's the single most effective piece of messaging in the setting, because it's been working for 800 years without a word being said. Theory 20. It's the same playbook every time. O'Hara gets a buster call for reading. Lulusia gets deleted for aligning with the revolutionaries. And now, there's a fleet heading for Elbaf with annexation in mind. The theory is that these aren't separate incidents. They're the same procedure being run at intervals, the way a company applies a policy. Identify a place that holds knowledge or independence the government can't control. Remove it. Update the record. The horrifying part is how routine it looks from the inside. A few more from around the edges of this because the government's machinery is full of odd corners. The cipher pole numbering, for one. We meet CP9 in Water 7, and the whole point is that they're the secret one, the assassination unit that officially doesn't exist. And then years later, CP0 turns up, and everyone realises there was a higher tier the entire time, reporting directly to the top, doing work CP9 wasn't cleared for. The theory people run with is that the numbering isn't a ranking of skill, but a ranking of what you're allowed to know, and that CP0's actual function is less espionage and more housekeeping for the Five Elders personally, which fits how they behave. They do investigate things, they arrive after decisions have been made, then there's the world nobles, and the question of what they actually do all day. And the answer, as far as the story has shown us, is that the Five Elders handle the actual governing. They don't administrate, they do administer the world government at the highest level. The actual running of the world is done by the Five Elders and the Marines, and by member nations paying their dues. The theory is that the entire aristocracy is functionally decorative, that they're an 800-year-old holding company whose sole remaining purpose is to exist, and that the world would notice their absence for about a fortnight, which makes the reverie fairly grim to reread. 50 kings travel to a mountaintop every 4 years to make requests of people who contribute nothing. Here's a detail I like more than I should. The Five Elders have surnames now. For most of the series, they were 5 interchangeable old men in white, deliberately anonymous, and then the story gave them individual names, individual powers, and individual bad moods. And the fandom's response was interesting, because the moment they became characters, they became less frightening. There's a theory that this was intentional on Oda's part, that anonymous power is scarier than named power, and that the reveal is doing deliberate work. You're supposed to find them slightly pathetic once you can tell them apart. And the last one for this stretch, the government's greatest weapon isn't the Marines, and it isn't an ancient weapon. It's the buster call, which is a procedure rather than a thing. Any one of a handful of officers can call it, and once called it cannot be recalled by the person who called it. It's a switch with no off position, which is a genuinely nasty piece of design because it means nobody involved has to feel responsible. The person who flipped it couldn't stop it. The ships that arrived were following orders. The officers on board were executing procedure. An entire island gets removed, and the accountability evaporates on the way down the chain. That's the world government in one mechanism, really. Not a villain making a choice, a process that runs. I'll say the quiet part here, because I've got opinions and no reason to hide them. The theories trying to make Immu secretly good are the ones I find weakest. There's a whole strand of thinking that says Immu is a double agent, keeping Joy Boy's plan alive from inside the enemy camp, waiting for the right moment. And I understand the appeal, because a villain who turns out to be an ally is a satisfying trick. But the story has shown us this person delete a populated country over breakfast. At some point the sheer body count has to mean something. I think Immu's tragedy is going to be that they genuinely believed all of it was necessary, which is a different and much sadder thing than being secretly right. Right, let's talk about Fruit. Here's the design choice I think about more than any other in this series. Devil fruits make you enormously powerful, and in exchange the ocean tries to kill you, in a story set almost entirely on water, about pirates. That's not a balancing decision, that's a thematic one. Somebody built that trade deliberately, in-universe as well as out. And a lot of the best theories in this stretch are attempts to work out who. Theory 21, the fruits are unrested souls. The theory goes that when the seas rose during that ancient war, an enormous number of people died at once, and their unfulfilled desires didn't go anywhere. They got stuck, and they crystallized into fruit, which would explain why the powers are so often oddly specific and oddly human. Somebody wanted to be untouchable, somebody wanted to be seen, somebody wanted, apparently, to be a very good barber. And the sea rejecting the user starts to look less like a curse and more like recognition. The water knows what you're carrying. Theory 22. The sea is the one saying no, related but distinct. Rather than the fruit weakening you, the theory is that the ocean itself is actively pushing back, that the sea devil framing in the name is literal, and that the sea is a participant in this world rather than a setting. It's a hard theory to argue for cleanly, but the series does keep treating the sea as something with opinions. Sea kings that respond to a voice, an ocean that goes quiet in places for no reason anyone can measure. I'd not bet money on it, but I'd not laugh at it either. Theory 23. The fruits are choosing. When a user dies, the fruit reappears somewhere nearby. That's established. The theory extends it. The reappearance isn't random, and the fruits keep ending up with people who resemble their previous owners in temperament. It's a small idea with big consequences because it means a devil fruit isn't equipment. It's got preferences. Theory 24. And Oda has been quietly confirming half of this in the SBS. This is the sort of thing that makes reading the volumes worthwhile. In a recent SBS, Oda listed off previous owners of fruits we know. Captain John held the fruit that Eustace Kid now has. A man named Ganzui had the one that ended up with Mr. Five. Gil Basta had Peronas. And he made a point of saying that devil fruits don't have fixed fighting styles at all, that it's entirely down to how the user thinks. Which is a lovely bit of world building buried in a Q&A column between chapters, where most of the anime audience will never see it. Theory 25. Awakening is the fruit believing in itself. Comes from that odd line about the sun god fruit being the most ridiculous power in existence. The theory reads, awakening not as the user getting stronger, but as the fruit's own nature fully asserting itself, particularly with Zoans, which are already stated to develop something like a will. Which would mean a fully awakened Zoan is a negotiation between two personalities rather than one person levelling up. Slightly unsettling that. Theory 25 and a half. Small mechanical curiosity. Logia users are supposed to be untouchable without haki, which made them the top of the food chain for the first half of the series. And then haki became common, and the entire category quietly stopped being special. There's a theory that this was planned rather than a power creep accident, and that the Logia's whole narrative purpose was to establish an unbeatable problem so that the solution, when it arrived, would feel earned. Whether you buy that probably depends on how you feel about the pre-time skip fights on a reread. Theory 26. Blackbeard is more than one person. the oldest theory about him, and the fandom keeps finding new fuel for it. The famous one is Shanks at Marineford, who greets him with a line along the lines of, "It's been a while, Blackbeard." Two names offered as though they might be two different answers. Add in the fact that he holds two fruits, which nobody else in the world has managed, and the sheer physical strangeness of the man, and you get a theory that he isn't a man with two powers, but a body with more than one occupant. Theory 27. Specifically, an octopus. The flag has 3 skulls and 8 bones, 1 head, 8 limbs. A mythical zoan of that shape would neatly explain how a single body could host multiple hearts and therefore multiple fruits. And it would explain the flag, which Oda drew long before any of this was a question. It's speculative. It's also the tidiest answer anyone has produced. Theory 28. The dark fruits bill hasn't come due. Blackbeard's darkness power has a stated downside. He takes more damage than a normal person because the darkness pulls pain in rather than deflecting it. He said it out loud, and then the story has, so far, largely not made him pay for it. The theory is that this is a loaded gun sitting on the table, planted deliberately, and that whoever finally beats him will do it by giving him more than he can absorb. Theory 29. Vegapunk might be wrong on purpose. Vegapunk's explanation involves lineage factors, and the fruits essentially writing false instructions into the body. It's clean, it's scientific, and the entire fandom accepted it immediately because the man is the smartest person alive. The theory is that this is exactly why it's suspicious. He's describing the mechanism, not the origin. He can tell you how a fruit rewrites a person and still have no idea what a fruit actually is. A scientist explaining the how and quietly skipping the why is a very familiar move, and the story loves setting up an authoritative answer and then walking round behind it. Theory 29 and a bit. Worth noting that the numbering of devil fruits is itself unresolved. There are said to be a fixed number in existence at any time, one of each, and yet nobody in the story has a complete list, including the government, which has spent centuries trying to build one. The theory is that the encyclopedia of fruits that keeps getting referenced is deliberately incomplete, and that there are powers nobody has catalogued because their users had the sense to stay quiet about them, which would mean the strongest fruit in the world might belong to somebody running a bakery. Theory 30. The gum fruit wasn't hiding, it was waiting. The government spent 8 centuries trying to get hold of one specific fruit, gave it a false name so nobody would look for the real one, and had it stolen by Shanks. 800 years, unlimited resources, total control of the historical record, and it kept slipping through. The theory is that this isn't bad luck. It ties straight back to the idea of a fruit with preferences. It didn't get away from them repeatedly. It refused them repeatedly. And then it ended up in a chest on a pirate ship parked next to a village, where a specific 7-year-old was hanging about being annoying. A few more oddities from this corner before we move, because devil fruits have some genuinely strange rules that the series states once, and then never revisits. There's the artificial fruit problem. Vegapunk cracked the manufacture of them, sort of, and the results were consistently horrible. The smiles, which mostly just fail and leave the user physically wrecked, and the ones that work give you an animal part rather than a transformation. And there's a detail attached that I think is the darkest thing in the entire series and gets treated as background. The failed smile users can only smile. Failed smile users cannot express any other emotion. Whatever they feel, however much pain they're in, their face laughs if their smile fails to grant them a power. Oda put that in a story about pirates and then moved on to the next fight. Then there's the question of what happens to a fruit's power when the user is underwater. The standard explanation is that standing water like the sea drains strength, which is why devil fruit users sink. But the specifics are odd. Rain doesn't do it. A bath doesn't do it. It has to be the sea, and it works through contact rather than immersion, and sea prism stone does the same job on land. The theory is that sea prism stone has the power of the sea, which is stated, and therefore that whatever the sea contains is a physical substance rather than a property, which would make the ocean less a body of water and more a solution with something dissolved in it. Here's a fun one. There's a fruit in this series whose power is to give one extra life. Marco has healing. Brooke is walking around because his fruit brought him back once, and he still had to find his body. And Law's fruit can grant immortality outright at the user's expense. The theory that ties them is that a meaningful proportion of the fruits are in some form about cheating death, and that the ancient civilization's central preoccupation was mortality, which loops neatly back to the idea of unfinished desires, if you're inclined to believe that. And the smallest one, which I include because it's my favourite piece of trivia in this whole area, Oda has said that eating a devil fruit is extremely unpleasant. They taste awful. Every single one. Which means every fruit user in the series, including all the ones who've built entire identities and philosophies around their powers, got there by biting into something genuinely revolting and deciding to finish it. Luffy ate one by accident because he was hungry and it was in a box. That's the whole origin of the most important power in the world. A kid found a strange fruit in a box and ate it because he was hungry. That's the fruit covered, more or less. Next up is the boy who ate one out of a box because he was hungry and had been told not to. The thing that ties these people together isn't a power or a bloodline trait, it's a laugh. Roger laughed on the execution platform. Whitebeard didn't carry the initial, but he went out grinning. Saul laughed while a buster call was closing in on him. Luffy laughs constantly at things that are not funny, including his own imminent death. The fandom noticed this pattern years before the story acknowledged it, and it's still the most reliable way to spot who's carrying the letter. Theory 31. Luffy isn't a reincarnation. Zunesha announced that Joy Boy had returned, and half the fandom immediately went, right, so Luffy is Joy Boy reborn. The other half pushed back, and I'm firmly in the second camp. What returned was the fruit's power and the shape of a promise, not a soul. Luffy has never been given a memory that isn't his. He doesn't know anything he shouldn't. He's not fulfilling anyone's plan. He just happens to be the second person in 800 years to be exactly the sort of idiot the job requires, which is a much better story than Destiny, because Destiny is boring and Luffy choosing it isn't. Theory 32. The smile is the whole philosophy. If you catalogue the moments, the D characters aren't laughing bravely at death, which would be a different thing. They're laughing because on some level they find it genuinely funny. There's a theory that this is the actual inherited trait, not strength or blood, but a specific attitude towards mortality that gets passed down as behaviour rather than genetics, which would make the will of the D less a bloodline and more a running joke that 800 years hasn't managed to kill. Theory 33. Garp knows. He knows more than he has ever said, and he has said almost nothing. He was at God Valley. He fought Roger repeatedly and drank with him afterwards. He raised Roger's son and never told the boy who his father was until it was far too late. He turned down promotion after promotion, specifically so he'd never have to take orders from the people at the top. That's not a simple man who happens to be strong. That's someone making a very deliberate, very long-term choice to stay exactly where he can see everything and be responsible for none of it. Theory 34. Dragon and the weather. We've seen wind arrive at convenient moments around him. Logue Town, obviously, where the lightning strike that saves Luffy is followed by a gust that flattens the whole square. The theory is a weather-based power, which would be neat given the family's habit of being an unstoppable natural event. The bit I find more interesting is the question nobody can answer. What was he doing in Logue Town that day at all? He turns up in the exact town where his son happens to be about to be executed on the exact day, and the story has never explained it. And I don't think it's an accident. Theory 35. The mother question. Oda has been asked about Luffy's mother more times than any other question and has never given a straight answer. He's deflected, joked, changed the subject. 28 years of that. And the theory the fandom has landed on is that the silence is itself the information. That she's someone whose identity would give away a piece of the endgame. Which might be true. It might also be that he genuinely never planned one and finds the question funny, which would be extremely in character. Theory 36. Nika was a story slaves told each other. This is the part of the lore I find most affecting. The sun god was worshipped by people in bondage as a figure who would arrive and free them, and the world government's response was to stop the name being spoken and rename the fruit after rubber. Not to disprove the myth, just to make it unsayable, which tells you they weren't afraid of a god. They were afraid of what people did while they were hoping for one. Theory 37. Emmet's apology. On Egghead, an ancient machine that has been waiting for centuries, meets Luffy and apologizes to him for not being able to make him king. Sit with that. Something from the old world's final chapter has been holding on to an unfinished sentence since the old world ended, and the first thing it does when the moment arrives is say, sorry. The theory attached is that Joy Boy had a claim to something and lost it, and that whatever kingship meant back then is going to come back round. Theory 38. The hat is the plot, not the sword, not the fruit, not the ship. The hat. It goes Roger, then Shanks, then Luffy, and it's treated by everyone who's ever held it as a genuine obligation rather than a keepsake. Shanks handed over the most valuable object he owned to a child on the condition that it come back to him eventually, which is either wildly sentimental or the single most calculated move in the series. And there's a much bigger, much older one in a freezer which we've already been round. 2 hats, 1 story, Theory 39, naming as erasure. Small theory, big implication. The government didn't destroy the fruit, they renamed it. Gomu Gomu no Mi. Rubber. Something dull and harmless that nobody would search for. The theory is that this is the same technique used on the Great Kingdom and on Wano's history, applied to an object rather than a nation. Don't burn it. Just call it something else and wait for everyone who remembers to die. That's a genuinely chilling method, and the series uses it repeatedly. Theory 39.5. People underrate how much of Luffy's characterization is about food. And I mean that seriously rather than as a joke about the eating. Almost every alliance he's made started with a meal. He shares food with enemies, with strangers, with people who've just tried to kill him. And it's the single, most consistent behaviour he has across 1,000 chapters. The theory is that this is deliberate characterization of the Nika figure. The god of liberation in this world isn't a warrior first, he's a host, which lines up rather neatly with a certain theory about what's waiting at the end of the journey. Theory 40. He won't be king in any sense you'd recognise. Luffy has said, more than once, that being king of the pirates means being the freest person on the sea, not ruling anything, not commanding anyone, which is an odd definition of king, and I don't think it's carelessness. The theory is that the ending inverts the word entirely, that whatever crown Joy Boy was denied gets handed to someone who has no interest in it whatsoever, and that this is the point. The one person who could take the world's throne is the one person who genuinely doesn't want it. Some smaller ones around the family before we move on, because the monkeys are a genuinely absurd household when you lay them out. Consider the arrangement. The grandfather is the most celebrated Marine alive. The father is the most wanted man on the planet and leads an army trying to overthrow the government the grandfather works for. The son is a pirate with a bounty large enough to embarrass both of them. 3 generations, 3 positions, all of them at war with each other on paper, and none of them apparently not bothered about it at family gatherings. There's a theory that this is Oda's actual thesis about the world's factions, that the labels are meaningless, and the only thing that's ever mattered is what an individual will and won't do. Garp is a marine who won't take orders. Dragon is a criminal who's rarely been shown doing anything criminal. Luffy is a pirate who mostly liberates countries by accident. Then there's Ace's parentage, which is worth pausing on because of how it was handled. Roger's son, hidden by Garp, raised under a false name, and the thing that nearly killed him wasn't the government finding out. It was Ace himself deciding he shouldn't exist. The theory attached is that the story deliberately made the burden of the bloodline internal rather than external. He was hunted for being Roger's son. He carried it himself for 20 years, and it did more damage than the world government managed. Sabo's a good one too. Presumed dead as a child, resurfaces years later with no memory, ends up as the Revolutionary Army's second in command. And a fan reading I've always liked is that Sabo is what Luffy would have been without the fruit. Same fire, same refusal, no rubber, and consequently a much angrier and much more political person. The brothers are three answers to the same question about what you do with a world you didn't consent to. And one last small thing. Luffy's scar. He put it there himself as a kid with a knife, to prove to Shanks that he was tough enough to be a pirate. And it's a stupid, painful, entirely characteristic decision. But it's also the reason his crew can identify him at a glance, and it's on his face for the rest of his life. And it means the first permanent mark on the main character was self-inflicted in an argument about whether he was serious. Nobody in the story ever brings it up again. Aside from Oda in SBS and later material, it's just there in every panel, quietly. There's a version of this story where all of that would be heavy. It mostly isn't, because Luffy spends the majority of his screen time trying to eat things he shouldn't, but it's there underneath, and the crew he assembled has its own set of quiet details worth going through. Let's start with a finger. Theory 41. Sanji's ring finger is always empty. A fan pointed this out, and once you've seen it, you can't stop seeing it. Whenever Oda draws Sanji wearing rings in colour spreads and promotional art, and he does this constantly, the ring finger is left bare, every time, across decades of illustrations. Oda has never explained it, and the obvious reading is that Sanji's keeping the spot free for whoever eventually turns up, which is the daftest, sweetest bit of character work in the whole series. Hidden in artwork, most people glance at for 4 seconds. Theory 42. Zoro's family tree, dropped in a Q&A column. This one still astonishes me. In an SBS entirely outside the story, Oda laid out Zoro's full lineage. He's connected to the Shimotsuki clan of Wano. He's a descendant of Ryuma, as in the legendary samurai whose reanimated corpse he fought at Thriller Bark and took a sword from. Zoro beat his own ancestor in a duel and walked off with the family blade without either of them knowing. And rather than putting that in the manga, Oda answered it in a letters page, essentially because he'd decided there was no natural place for it in the plot. Theory 43, and it was foreshadowed 500 chapters early. Back in Wano, Zoro hears a particular cry during Momonosuke's training and says he recognises it, that an old man in his village used to make the same noise. Throwaway line. 2 seconds. That's the seed for the entire lineage reveal, planted long before anyone had reason to care, and the fandom picked at it for years. It's a good demonstration of how this series rewards being slightly obsessive. Theory 44. Sanji's modifications are still dormant. The germline enhancements were supposed to have failed on him, and then in Wano his body started doing things it shouldn't. The theory is that nothing failed, it was simply delayed, and that we haven't seen the end of it. What makes it interesting is that Sanji's horror at the idea isn't about power, it's about identity. He's terrified of becoming his family, so the theory carries a proper cost attached, which is more than most power-up theories manage. Theory 45. Nami's navigation is a lore skill. The weather in the Grand Line makes no physical sense, and the standard explanation is magnetism and island climates. The theory goes further. The seas were engineered, and Nami is the only person aboard actually reading the evidence of that on a daily basis. She's been quietly gathering data on a broken planet for 1,000 chapters, while everyone assumes she's just good with maps. I'd love for the story to do something with this. I'm not confident it will. Theory 45.5. On Nami's tattoo, briefly, because the design work is lovely. She had a mark burned onto her arm as a symbol of ownership, and when she was free of it, she didn't remove it, she drew over it a tangerine and a pinwheel for the woman who raised her, and the friend who stayed. The theory is barely a theory, it's just that the series has a consistent visual grammar about marks. The government brands people, and the people who escape don't erase the brand, they cover it with something they chose. You see the same logic on other characters once you're looking for it. Theory 46. Usopp's whole arc has been pointing at Elbaf. He's told the same lie for hundreds of chapters, that he's a brave warrior of the sea, which is specifically what the giants of Elbaf call themselves. He learned it from Dory and Brogy at Little Garden and adopted it as his personal fiction, and now the crew are actually there. The theory is that Oda set this up at Little Garden, which was ages ago, and has been letting it sit. Usopp's arc has always been about a lie becoming true through sheer stubbornness, and there's a version of this arc where that finally lands properly. Theory 47. Blackbeard wrecked Drum Island a year before he appeared. Genuinely one of my favourite bits of trivia. Before the crew ever reached Drum, the island's king was driven off by a pirate of overwhelming cruelty, and the doctors were dragged along with him, which is why the island has no medical care when Nami falls ill. That pirate was Blackbeard. He's the reason Chopper's story happens, and he wouldn't properly appear for roughly another year of publication. Oda had him doing damage off-screen before we knew his face. Theory 48. Robin is a single point of failure. Not a theory so much as an uncomfortable observation the fandom keeps returning to. The poneglyphs can only be read by the Kozuki bloodline and by Robin. That's the entire supply of literacy for the most important documents in the world. The government burned an island to reduce that number, and very nearly succeeded. Every plan anyone has, including the villains, currently depends on one woman not dying. It's an extraordinary amount of narrative weight to hang on someone who spends most arcs quietly reading in a deck chair. Theory 49. Frankie, Pluton, and inherited work. The blueprints for an ancient weapon were kept by generations of shipwrights in one town, passed down, protected, and eventually burned by Iceberg's judgment, at which point Frankie revealed he'd memorized them. The theory people like is that this makes Frankie the only person alive who can build a weapon capable of ending the world, and that the ship he actually chose to build with that knowledge is a comically cheerful lion with a slide on it. That's the joke, and I think it's the point. Theory 49.5. A small thing about Jinbei that I don't think gets enough air. He is one of several members of the crew who joined as adults, with established careers, reputations, and former positions of real authority. Everyone else was a teenager or a wreck. Jinbei was a warlord. He'd sat at the same table as the government, and he chose to take orders from a boy, roughly half his age, who cannot read a map, and has never once looked like he regretted it. The theory is that Jinbei is the crew's proof of concept. If the most institutionally respectable person in the story looks at Luffy and decides to follow him, the reader is meant to take that as evidence rather than sentiment. Theory 50. Brook was set up 300 episodes early. Before Thriller Bark, back around the Water 7 stretch, Kokoro mentions in passing that the crew's route will take them through the Florian Triangle, a place with ghost ships crewed by the dead. Nothing comes of it at the time. It's atmosphere. And then there's the SBS detail about ship christenings, where Oda explains that a bottle is broken against a new ship's bow for luck, and that a bottle failing to break curses the vessel. Kaya christens the Going Merry. The bottle doesn't break, that's in Volume 5. The Merry gets declared beyond repair in Volume 34 and breaks in half in Volume 44. While we're on the crew, there are a handful of structural theories about how the whole group is put together that I think are worth going through. The dream's symmetry, for one. Every Straw Hat has a stated dream, and the theory is that they're deliberately paired against each other in ways nobody in the crew has noticed. Sanji wants a sea where all fish live together. Luffy wants to be the freest man alive, which in most readings means removing the thing that divides the seas. Robin wants the true history. Nico Olvia died for it, and the man who'll physically deliver it is the one carrying blueprints for the weapon that could level the barrier. It's a very tidy machine, and none of them assembled it on purpose. Then there's the question of whether the crew is finished. The number 10 keeps coming up in fan discussion, largely because fans speculate Luffy wanted 10 members, and the crew currently has fewer than that. And Oda has been asked about it repeatedly, and given answers ranging from vague to actively unhelpful. The theory is that there's one more coming, and always has been. Half the fandom thinks it's a shipwright's apprentice, half thinks it's someone from Elbaf, and a stubborn contingent still thinks it's Vivi, who has never technically been a crew member, and whose status Oda has addressed in the SBS without ever quite closing the door. Speaking of which, that's a proper long-running Fastum argument with an actual answer. Zoro is occasionally called the first mate. He isn't. Oda has clarified in the SBS that Zoro's the number 2 of the crew, but has never held the title, and his official role is combatant. The only person in the story who's called him first mate is Bartolomeo, who explicitly said it was his personal opinion, and Bartolomeo is not a reliable narrator about anything involving the Straw Hats. It's a small thing. It winds people up enormously, and here's a detail about the ships that I only clocked recently. Oda drew full architectural schematics for the Thousand Sunny in an SBS, not a sketch, proper plans with the crew quarters, the workrooms, the aquarium bar, and a kitchen with a numbered lock on the fridge, specifically to stop Luffy eating everything. He designed the interior of a fictional boat to the level of detail where you could theoretically build it, and then published it in the back of a volume for the roughly small percentage of readers who'd care. That's the one I always come back to when people ask whether the foreshadowing is real or whether fans are pattern matching. Because that's not a fan reading, that's Oda explaining a superstition in a letters column, drawing the exact failure in a scene nobody flagged, and then waiting 29 volumes to collect. You could argue he decided later and worked backwards. I don't believe it for a moment, but you could argue it. Now the people the crew keep running into, there's a rumour about Shanks that the fandom cannot kill, no matter how many times it gets beaten to death in the comments. Theory 51, Shanks is a celestial dragon, specifically a Figureland, found as a baby in a treasure chest on a Roger Pirates raid, which is already an odd origin, and now sitting next to a family name attached to the holy bloodlines. The theory used to be a joke and has steadily stopped being one. What I find interesting is that it doesn't necessarily make him a villain. It makes him someone who was born into the worst family in the world and went and became a pirate instead, which is arguably the most heroic thing anyone in this series has done. Theory 52. Shanks is the final villain, and this is where the fandom loses its mind. Every so often someone posts evidence, usually something like the opening sequence positioning him opposite Kid, and the replies arrive like a weather event. People take this one personally. My honest read is that the theory is thin, and the reaction to it is more interesting than the theory itself, because it shows how much of this fandom's emotional investment sits with a character who's been on screen for maybe 2 hours, total across 30 years. Theory 53. There are 2 of him. Shamrock, a twin, a holy knight, and the reason a lot of the Shanks was in 2 places arguments suddenly resolved themselves. It also retroactively cleans up a scene that confused everyone for years, where a red-haired man met with the 5 elders about a certain pirate and the anime cast Shank's voice actor in the role. The fandom argued about that scene for the best part of a decade. Theory 54. And Oda has now addressed it in the manga, which is a fairly funny way to resolve a decade of debate. A question that dominated forums, theory channels, and comment sections, quietly answered in a Q&A column between chapters. Anime-only viewers still don't know, incidentally, because the SBS doesn't get adapted. Theory 55. Blackbeard is the last of the Davy line. This is recent, and it's enormous. There's an old bloodline Davy, and the name attached to it once claimed to be King of the World, which Imu apparently denies with some heat. Rox was of that line. And the only known survivor of it now is Marshall D. Teach, which means the man who spent the series being a straightforward opportunist is actually carrying a claim older than the world government itself, and possibly doesn't care about it in the slightest, which would be very him. Theory 56. He allegedly never sleeps, confirmed by Oda in the manga itself of all places. Blackbeard doesn't sleep, which is why he's constantly turning up in places he shouldn't be, and it retroactively explains his line in the very first arc he appeared in about dreams never ending. He was being literal, and everyone took it as philosophy. Theory 56.5. Something about Rayleigh that I've always liked. The second in command of the most successful crew in history spent 20 years working as a coating mechanic under a false name in a lawless archipelago, gambling badly while the world assumed he was dead. And the reason he broke cover was to teach a stranger's grandson how to fight. That's a man who had every reason to stay hidden and gave it up for someone else's kid. The theory attached is that Roger asked him to. Theory 57. Whitebeard's last words were a strategy. He dies announcing to the entire watching world that the treasure is real and someone will find it, and the immediate consequence is a global surge in piracy. The theory is that this was deliberate. He wasn't being poetic. He was pulling the pin on the world order with his final breath, dumping thousands of new pirates onto the seas specifically to make the government's life impossible, which is a much more spiteful and much better reading of that scene. Theory 58. Big Mum, Rox, and the children. She was on that crew at God Valley. She was very young, and the flashback material has been steadily clarifying what was actually happening there, which involved the Garling children and a considerably uglier arrangement than a simple pirate raid. The theory is that Linlin's entire personality, the family obsession, the hoarding of people, comes out of what she saw and did on that island as a child. Theory 59. Kaido can't die, and it isn't a joke. He's tried. Repeatedly, and with real commitment. Thrown himself off a sky island, been executed by every method available, and he keeps getting up. The story plays it as a gag about how hard he is. The theory says it's a lore clue, that whatever's in him is connected to the older world, and that immortality that nobody asked for is a shape this series clearly finds interesting. Theory 59.5. Something about Marco that I think is quietly one of the great character decisions in the series. After Whitebeard died and the crew fell apart, the most capable surviving member, a man with a mythical Zoan and decades of experience, went back to a small island and worked as a doctor. No revenge campaign, no empire. He looked at the wreckage and decided the useful thing to do was treat people. The theory is that Marco is the story's answer to what a good man does after losing, and it's answered by having him do something boring. Theory 60. Buggy inherited something after all. He was on the Roger Pirates, he was there, and he's now an emperor entirely by accident, which is the funniest ongoing bit in the series. But the theory is that Buggy's fruit is quietly one of the most dangerous in the world, if it ever awakened, given what Paramecia awakening does to the surrounding environment, and that a man who can split things apart at will is being kept in reserve as a punchline that eventually stops being funny. I don't need this to be true. I just enjoy it enormously. A few more from around this tier of the world, because the top of the power structure has some quiet oddities in it. The Marines have their own version of this, for instance. The 3 admirals are named after colours, and the previous generation and the current one all follow the same convention, which is a fairly obvious nod to the Sentai tradition. But the theory that's more interesting concerns the admiral's actual function. They're deployed almost exclusively against pirates and revolutionaries, and never once against the aristocracy or against internal corruption. And there's a strong reading that the rank exists to protect the government rather than the public, which some of them clearly know. Kuzan walked out. Fujitora spends his entire time on screen, being visibly appalled at his own employer and doing his job anyway. Then there's Kobe, who is the most quietly interesting character in the series and gets a fraction of the attention he deserves. He starts as a coward on a pirate ship, gets talked into having a spine by a stranger, and then climbs the marine hierarchy on merit, while continuing to believe the thing he believed at the start, which is that the point of the job is saving people. The theory is that Kobe is being built as the counterweight to Luffy for the ending, not an enemy, a person who chose the other route out of the same conversation and is going to end up standing somewhere very awkward. Here's a good one about the Emperors, as a system rather than as individuals. The world's balance of power was officially held up by 3 groups: the Marines, the 7 Warlords, and the 4 Emperors, and that arrangement was described in universe as stable, which it very obviously was not, because it involved handing government pardons to pirates in exchange for them behaving, and it collapsed the moment anyone pushed on it. The theory is that the whole structure was always theatre, a way of describing chaos as though it were policy, and that the government knew and kept the language going because the alternative was admitting they'd lost control of the sea decades earlier, and a small one to finish. Shanks lost his arm to a sea king saving a child, and then made a point of telling everyone it was a small price, which reads as a nice line about friendship. It's also, if you think about it practically, the most senior figure in the world's pirate community voluntarily giving up roughly half his combat capability and then remaining an emperor anyway. Nobody in universe seems to find this strange. I find it very strange indeed. Small aside, if you've been enjoying this, a subscribe helps more than you'd think. Most of the work on these is checking whether a theory actually says what everyone claims it says, which it frequently doesn't, and that bit is slow and nobody sees it. Right, onwards. Where we're going next is the place this entire series has been pointing at since about volume 13. Start with the tree. Elbaf is built around and through an enormous tree, and the country is stacked in tiers, which is about as clear a Norse reference as you can draw without labelling it. Yggdrasil holds up 9 worlds in the mythology. Elbaf has fewer, but the principle's identical, and it means the geography of the island is telling you the social structure before anyone opens their mouth. Theory 61. The tiers are the point. There's a heaven realm at the top, where the holy knights appear via magic circles rather than walking in like everyone else. The theory is that the vertical layout is doing the same job the red line does globally. Gods above, people below, and a physical structure enforcing it, which would make Elbaf a small model of the whole world, which is very much this series' habit. Theory 62. Loki isn't cursed, he's inconvenient. The imprisoned prince chained up, blamed for a killing, treated by his own country as a monster. Named after a trickster god who in the actual mythology gets bound underground for a crime, with more context than anyone admits. The theory is that the accusation is at best incomplete, and that a country with an enormous stake in a particular story about itself found it easier to lock away the person who complicated it, which, again, is the O'Hara move at family scale. Theory 63. Harold and Rox were connected. The previous king of Elbaf and the most notorious pirate in history had a relationship the world's official record does not include. That's now story rather than theory, but the theorizing around it is about what it implies. If the Giant's royal line was tangled up with the crew that attacked God Valley, then Elbaf has been sitting on a piece of the world's biggest secret this entire time, quietly, while everyone treated it as a fairy tale island of large people who like fighting. Theory 64. God Valley was erased from the map, not destroyed in a battle, removed. The island isn't on charts. The incident is officially a story about a marine hero and a pirate crew, and everything else about it has been sanded off. And the flashback material has been steadily showing that the tidy version is nothing like what happened. The theory that ran for years before any of this, and turned out to be broadly right, was simply that the official account was a cover, purely because it was too clean. Which I've always thought is a decent instinct generally. When a story about a chaotic event has no loose ends in it at all, somebody tidied. Theory 65. Garp hates being a hero. He earned the title at God Valley, and he spent his entire life visibly uncomfortable with it. Never took the promotions, never let anyone make a speech. The theory is that the title is attached to something he'd rather not be thanked for, and that Hero of the Marines is, to him, a description of the worst day of his life, that people keep congratulating him on, which reframes his whole cheerful oath routine as a fairly effective coping mechanism. Theory 65.5. Worth flagging how deliberately the series has withheld Elbaf. It gets named in the East Blue portion of the story, essentially as a place two large men are homesick for, and then it stays on the horizon for roughly 1,000 chapters while the crew go everywhere else on the map. Fans have been asking about it since the 90s. There is a genuine argument that no location in any long-running series has been promised for longer before delivery, and the theory about why is simply that Oda couldn't bring them there until the lore was ready to be read. Theory 66. Giants, remember. They live around 300 years. 3 of those lifetimes gets you back to the Void Century, which means the chain of testimony between the ancient war and the present day is about 8 people long in Elbaf, compared to 30-odd generations of humans. The theory is that this is exactly why the world government wants the place, and why they want it now. It's not the strength, it's the memory. A country full of people whose grandparents' grandparents were there is the single largest surviving threat to the edited version. I love this theory, mostly because it makes the giants dangerous, for a reason that has nothing to do with being 12 meters tall. Theory 67. Little Garden was the seed. Dory and Brogy had been dueling for 100 years over a disagreement nobody could resolve, on an island of prehistoric survivors, and it played at the time as a strange, sad little side story. The theory is that Oda planted the entire culture of Elbaf there, in one arc, hundreds of chapters before the crew would ever go. Their honor code, their idea of a warrior's death, the whole framework, and the crew's first real contact with giant culture came from 2 blokes who'd been hitting each other for a century over a mistake, which is either the noblest thing in the series or the stupidest, and I genuinely cannot decide, and I suspect that's deliberate. Theory 68. The Holy Knights are the arc's opposition, which was theorised well before it became obvious, largely off the back of their arrival scene, and the magic circles closely resembling those used elsewhere by the 5 elders, but with a simpler design, lacking their distinctive numbering. What makes them a different kind of threat is that they're not pirates or a rival crew. They're the sharp end of the government's religion, which means the arc isn't a fight over territory, it's a fight over whose gods count. Theory 69. Which is why the timing matters. The world has just heard Vegapunk's broadcast. Everyone now knows things the government spent centuries suppressing. And the response is a move on the one country that could corroborate it. The theory is that this isn't a coincidence of scheduling. The annexation is damage control. Theory 69.5. There's a running observation about how the giants treat books. Elbaf has a library, and its contents are described with a seriousness that the series usually reserves for weapons, which slots straight into the pattern. The world government's interest in a place has always tracked with how much that place has written down. O'Hara had books, Wano had records. Elbaf has a library and a population who remember. The theory is that the annexation isn't about resources or strategy at all, and never has been. It's an acquisition of paper. Theory 70. Elbaf is where the myth started. The sun god is described as a legend of Elbaf specifically, so the folk hero that enslaved people across the world prayed to, whose name the government made unsayable, originates on this island, which means the crew have arrived at the source of the story their captain is currently starring in, without particularly meaning to. A handful more from the giants side of things, because Elbaf has been accumulating detail in the background for a very long time. Take the Vikings problem. Elbaf is coded Norse, obviously, but the giants we've met from it have a religious structure that doesn't map cleanly onto anything real. They have gods, they have a sun deity, they have a warrior's afterlife, and they have a code about honourable combat that Dorian Brogy took to a genuinely deranged extreme. The theory is that Oda built their religion to be a survival of something older than the world government's version, and that the reason it feels slightly off is that it's the last intact belief system from before the record was rewritten. Everyone else's mythology got edited. Theirs didn't, because nobody could get onto the island to do it. Then there's the size question, which sounds like a joke and isn't. Giants have a minimum height of 12 metres, which puts them at roughly 6 times human height, and the series has never really addressed what that does to a shared world economy, but it does address what it does socially. Giants who live among humans, like Hadruddin or the ones working at Aenys Lobby, are consistently treated as labour or as spectacle. And there's a reading that Elbaf's isolation isn't pride, it's the entirely reasonable response of a people who've watched what happens to their own when they leave. Oimo and Kashi are the case study for that, incidentally. 2 giants tricked into working as gate guards for the government for over a century on the promise that their captain would be released. He'd been alive the whole time. They stood at a gate for 50 years, defending the people who'd lied to them because they'd given their word. And the thing that ended it wasn't a fight, it was somebody finally telling them the truth. That's an Elbaf story in miniature, and it happened long before we ever saw the island. Here's a fun detail on the current arc's staging. The Straw Hats arrived at Elbaf in company, which almost never happens. Kuma, Bonnie, Lilith, the giant warrior pirates, all in the same place. Oda has spent the entire series keeping his cast separated and rotating them, and now he's concentrating them. The theory is straightforward and probably correct. This is where the pieces get assembled, because after this there aren't many places left to go. I do think that's the most elegant piece of long-range construction in the series. Not a plot twist, a location. The place mentioned offhandedly by 2 giants 1,000 chapters ago turns out to be the origin point of the thing the whole story's about. And it's been sitting on the map the entire time, marked, waiting, while everyone assumed it was just where the big lads live. Right, let's step out of the world entirely for a bit. No plot in this stretch. This one's entirely about the bloke drawing it, because some of the best material in this fandom isn't about the world at all. It's about the construction. Theory 71. The 100-chapter rhyme. A leaker and a fair few fans noticed that events in the manga sometimes echo events exactly 100 chapters earlier. Same beat, same position in the count. People used it during Wano to predict when specific fights would end, and it worked often enough to be unsettling. Whether it's deliberate scheduling, an unconscious rhythm from decades of weekly work, or just the fandom finding faces in clouds, I couldn't tell you. It's a lovely thing to have noticed either way. Theory 72. Pandaman. There is a man in a panda suit hidden in background crowds throughout the entire series, and he's been in there since roughly Volume 4. Oda confirmed him in the SBS, along with a character called Tomato Gang, who also lurks about in the background of scenes for no reason. 28 years of drawing crowds, and he's still hiding the same joke in them. That's not world building. That's a man entertaining himself at work. Theory 73. Every day of the year has a birthday. There is now at least one official One Piece character, birthday for every single date in the calendar. Some were assigned by Oda as puns on the characters' names or numbers. Some were suggested by fans in the SBS and simply accepted on the spot. Robin's, Chopper's and Tashigi's were all fan suggestions that Oda agreed with and made canon, which means part of the official record of this world was crowdsourced from letters. Theory 74, Chapter 5. Alvida, having watched Luffy do something absurd, asks him if he's the devil's offspring. Just a line in the 5th chapter before anything exists. 427 chapters later, we learn Luffy's father is Dragon, the man the world government considers the worst criminal alive. The theory is that this was intentional. The counter-argument is that, "Are you the devil's kid?" is a normal thing to say, and Oda got lucky. I lean towards intentional, mostly because of how often this happens. Theory 75. The cards. Ace's death was foreshadowed with playing cards, in a panel where Luffy is holding the Ace of Spades. Fans dug this up afterwards, which is always the risk with foreshadowing theories, but the imagery around Ace is consistently card-based and consistently ominous in a way that isn't accidental. Theory 75.5. On the numbers, since we're on craft, Oda uses number puns constantly, mostly through Japanese wordplay, where digits stand in for syllables. Character names, dates, bounty figures. Some of it is straightforward, some of it requires a working knowledge of 2 languages and a lot of patience, and the fandom's translators have built entire documents cataloguing it. Whether any of it is load-bearing for the plot is doubtful. It's the sort of thing a person does because they enjoy it. Theory 76. The silhouettes. The 4 emperors appeared in shadow long before any of them mattered, back when Garp was explaining the world to Luffy after Eni's lobby. Whitebeard, Shanks, Kaido, Big Mum, all drawn and waiting. Some of those characters wouldn't get a proper scene for hundreds of chapters. He designed them and put them on the board, and then just left them there. Theory 77. Haki was in Chapter 1. Shanks intimidates a Sea King into leaving, with nothing but a look. At the time it reads as the mysterious veteran move. It's Conqueror's Haki, roughly 500 chapters, before the concept has a name. And there's a second planting in Skypiea with Enel's mantra, which is Observation Haki under a local name, again, years early. The system was in the story before the story explained there was a system. Theory 78, the Dragon Special. In 2008 there was an anime special where the crew were reimagined as mythical creatures and Luffy was a dragon. His father's identity would not be revealed for some time after that. Toei presumably had no idea. Oda presumably found it hilarious. Theory 79. His name is in the background. Animators have hidden Oda's name on props throughout the anime, on mirrors, on the spines of books, small tributes tucked into scenes that pass in a second and a half. It's the sort of thing that only exists because the people making it actually liked the thing they were making, which is not always a given on a show that's been running since 1999. Theory 79.5. A word on the anime's pacing, since it's the fandom's oldest grievance, and it's finally changed. For years, the adaptation ran at roughly half a chapter an episode, which produced entire episodes of characters reacting to things, and which anyone who watched through the middle of the 2010s remembers with a specific kind of weariness. That's over. The show has gone seasonal, up to 26 episodes a year in 2 blocks, and roughly 1 chapter per episode. Fans were split when it was announced. Having seen the Elbaf episodes, the argument has largely gone quiet because they look extraordinary. Theory 80. The SBS is a second canon. And this is the one I genuinely push people towards. The question and answer column in the volumes has been running since volume 4, and it holds a startling amount of real information. Character ages, the full explanation of a swordsman's ancestry, the name of the planet, previous owners of devil fruits, and lately a set of answers about 4 colossal bridges spanning the seas that Oda says will matter later. None of that is in the anime. None of it is in the chapters. It sits in the back pages of the books, between a drawing request and a joke about Zoro's teeth hurting. A few more craft observations while we're here, because this is my favourite part of the whole subject, the cover stories. For a start, for long stretches of the series, the colour panel at the top of each chapter has carried its own ongoing narrative, running in the background of the main plot, following characters who'd left the story. Buggy's crew wandering about, Kobe and Helmeppo's training, Enel on the moon, and these aren't filler. Events in them have become load-bearing later, which means Oda has been running a second serialised comic in the margin of the first one. In single panels, weekly, for decades, and a substantial portion of the audience has never read a single one of them. Then there's the chapter title thing. The cover stories have their own numbered titles in sequence, forming names for each arc of the side plot. It's the sort of organisational discipline you'd expect from someone with a wall of index cards, and not from someone drawing 19 pages a week under deadline. Here's a small one about the art itself. Oda's early chapters and his current chapters look enormously different, and the usual explanation is that his style evolved, which is true. But there's a more specific observation the fandom has made, which is that the panel density went up rather than down. Most long-running artists simplify over time because their hand hurts and the deadline doesn't move. He went the other way. The Elbaf spreads have more information in them per page than anything from the East Blue. And there's the question of the ending, which he's been asked about since roughly 2005. He's given a date, moved it, given another, moved that. At one point the estimate was 2025. We're past that, and I've stopped finding this frustrating, mostly because the pattern is so consistent that it's clearly not a scheduling failure. It's a man who keeps discovering that a thing he'd allotted 5 chapters to actually needs 20, and who has never once chosen the shorter version. That habit is why the story is good, and it's also why it isn't finished. The counter-argument, which I have some sympathy with, is that the arcs have got baggier, and that a tighter version would land harder. I don't fully agree, but I understand people who've been reading since the 90s feeling like they'd quite like an ending while they've still got their eyesight, which is why the split between manga readers and anime watchers in this fandom is so much wider than it looks. It's not just a matter of who's further ahead. There's a whole parallel layer of the world that only exists in a letters page, answered casually, often between 2 gags, and it's been accumulating for 114 volumes. Anyway, let's talk about the bits Oda didn't make up. In 1730, a French pirate stood on a scaffold in the Indian Ocean about to be hanged. Theory 81. Roger's execution is a historical reenactment. The pirate was Olivier Levasseur. Legend has it that, as he stood there, he pulled a necklace from his neck containing a cryptogram of 17 lines and threw it into the crowd, shouting something to the effect of, "Find my treasure. Whoever can understand it. Nobody ever has. The treasure, if it existed, has never been found. Now hold that next to Gold D. Roger." Executed publicly, and with his last breath he tells the crowd that his treasure is real, and they can have it if they go and look. The world erupts into a piracy boom, and the clue he left behind is a set of stone tablets in a script almost nobody can read. It's the same event with the volume turned up. Oda took a footnote from the 18th century and built a 30-year story on top of it. Theory 82. Zoro is named after a real man, and it's the only one Oda has fully confirmed. François l'Olonnais, a French buccaneer in the 1660s, with a reputation for genuine cruelty. Say the surname the way Japanese pronunciation handles it, and you get Roronoa. Oda has confirmed this one directly, and as far as anyone can establish, it's the only straw hat named after an actual pirate. Everyone else is either invention or a much looser reference. Theory 83. Whitebeard is named after a pirate after all. Marshall D. Teach comes from Edward Teach, the real Blackbeard, which everyone knows. The one people miss is that Edward Newgate is named after Newgate Prison, a London jail that stood for centuries and held pirates before they were hanged, including Captain Kidd. So the two men are named after a pirate and the place pirates were locked up in. Given how their relationship goes, that's an unpleasantly good joke. Theory 84. There was a woman in the 1720s who left a comfortable background, went to sea, fought alongside men, and then simply stops appearing in the record. Nobody knows how Anne Bonny died. She's there in the trial documents, and then she isn't anywhere. And the historians have been arguing about it ever since. That's Jewellery Bonny's namesake, and the noble background detail has aged rather well given what we've since found out about where she actually came from. Alvida works the same way, from the other direction. She's the first pirate Luffy ever meets, on page 1 of the story essentially, and she's named after Alwilda, a Scandinavian princess who supposedly fled an arranged marriage and took up piracy instead. Supposedly because a fair number of historians think Alwilda never existed, and the whole thing is a legend that got written down often enough to look like history. So the first pirate in One Piece is named after a pirate who might be entirely fictional. I don't think Oda planned that joke. I'm choosing to enjoy it anyway. Theory 85. Kidd is two people. Eustace Kidd takes his surname from Eustace the Monk, a French mercenary and pirate, and his given name from William Kidd, a Scot who was hired to hunt pirates, became one, and was hanged for it. Two very different men welded together, which is arguably what you'd want from a character defined by attraction and repulsion. Whether Oda thought that hard about it, or just liked the sound of both names, I couldn't tell you. Knowing him, both. Theory 85.5. The Whitebeard pirate structure has a real-world root too. Whitebeard ran his crew as a set of divisions, each with its own commander operating semi-independently, which is much closer to how large pirate operations actually functioned than the single captain model everyone imagines. Big fleets in the Golden Age were federations. Ships joined, left, took orders when it suited them, and the famous captains were closer to chairmen than kings. Which is why the collapse after Marineford is so plausible. You can't inherit a federation. Theory 86. Water 7 is Venice, and Oda said so. Confirmed in an SBS, which explains why the whole place is canals and boats and slowly sinking, because that's just Venice, with the subtext removed. And once you know he does this, the map starts opening up. Alabaster is ancient Egypt, with the river in the right place. Zoo is built on the silhouette of Elephant Rock in Iceland. Theory 87. Dressrosa is heavily inspired by Spain, especially Barcelona, specifically the mosaic work in Park Güell, which is Gaudí, which is why the whole country looks like nothing else in the series. And Mary Jouas takes its castle from Chambord in France, which is a properly pointed choice, given that Chambord was a royal hunting lodge built to be enormous and barely lived in. Theory 88. Ninomiya Sontoku was a 19th century agricultural reformer, and the way Japan remembers him is very specific. Not a portrait, a statue of a boy walking along reading a book with a bundle of firewood strapped to his back, studying while carrying the load. There are versions of that statue outside primary schools all over the country, and generations of children have walked past it on the way in to lessons. That's Bartholomew Kuma. The posture, the book, the weight on his back, all of it. And it means a huge amount of what that character is communicating visually lands instantly for a Japanese reader and is completely invisible to everyone else, which given what the story eventually does to him and what he ends up carrying, is about as pointed as a design reference gets. I only found this out recently, and I've not really recovered from it. Theory 89. The Gangsters. Capone beige from Al Capone, obviously. Lafitte from Jean Lafitte, and that one's better than the name alone, because the real Lafitte was a pirate and privateer, unlike the backstory Oda gave him as a former policeman. Theory 89.5. One more on the geography. Scipio's Shandora is drawn from El Dorado and the general European obsession with a golden city that turned out to be mostly a rumour that got a lot of people killed. And Oda's version keeps the sad part intact. The city of gold is real, it's up there, and by the time anyone reaches it, there's nobody left who remembers what it was for. The explorers who died looking for it in real life were chasing a story. In One Piece, the story was true, and it made no difference to anyone. Theory 90. The song came first. Binks Sake is the oldest song in the series, and by some distance the saddest. And there's a well-known theory, argued at length by a fan translator, that the final island's name comes straight out of its lyrics, which describe a never-ending, ever-wandering, funny sort of tale. A laughing tale, laugh tale, which would mean the destination of the entire journey was named after a drinking song that Brooks' dead crew sang while they were dying, and that Luffy learned as a child from Shanks, and that has been playing in the background of this story since before anyone knew what it was pointing at. There's more of this than fits comfortably in 10 entries, so here's a handful of extras. The Sanji design is a good one. His look and a fair bit of his early attitude were reportedly influenced by a Steve Buscemi role, which you can absolutely see once someone tells you and cannot unsee afterwards. Ivankov's whole presentation comes from Tim Curry in a very specific film, and again, once you know, the resemblance is not subtle. Oda does this constantly with actors and musicians and generally doesn't hide it. Then there's the naming logic for the seas themselves, which is beautifully lazy in the best way. East blue, west blue, north blue, south blue. 4 oceans, 4 compass points, no romance about it whatsoever, and then the mythical 5th one at the centre that everyone dreams about is called All Blue. He built the entire geography's naming convention on the assumption that sailors are not poets. The Grand Line's climate is worth a mention too. Every island generates its own weather via a magnetic field, and the compasses don't work, which is the in-universe explanation for why the route is impossible. And the real-world root of that is fairly clearly the historical difficulty of longitude, which was genuinely the great navigational problem of the Age of Sail and got people killed in enormous numbers before the marine chronometer sorted it. Oda took the actual thing that made 18th century seafaring lethal and made it magical. And the warlord concept comes straight out of privateering. Governments issuing letters of marque to pirates, legitimising them in exchange for attacking rivals, and then acting appalled when the arrangement produced monsters. Henry Morgan was knighted. Kidd was hanged, largely for doing the same job with worse timing. The series didn't need to invent the moral squalor of that system. It just drew it bigger. That's the thing I find quietly remarkable about all of this. There's a version of research that's just name-checking, where you borrow a famous pirate and move on. Oda does that occasionally. But then there's Levasseur's cryptogram, or a superstition about christening bottles, or a statue outside a primary school. And those aren't name checks. Those are things you find because you went looking and then sat on for 20 years waiting for the right moment. And there's a thing this does to the reading experience that I don't think gets talked about enough. Once you know the real material is in there, the fantasy stops feeling arbitrary. A story about rubber men and talking reindeer should be weightless, and it isn't. And I think the reason is that the scaffolding underneath it is all load-bearing. The seas are difficult because 18th century navigation was difficult. The warlord system is squalid because privateering was squalid. The treasure hunt has a cryptogram in it because a real one did. You can build a fantasy world out of nothing and it'll be fine. But the ones that stick tend to have something real holding the shape. And this one has more of it buried in the foundations than almost anything else I've read. Which brings us to the last stretch, and the only question that actually matters. Theory 91. It's booze. Sounds daft, it isn't. The argument runs through Bink's Seike and the culture of sharing a drink in this series, which comes up constantly and always at emotionally significant moments. Sark cups exchanged between brothers, sark shared between enemies who've decided to stop. In Japanese custom, sharing a cup is how you formalize a bond. So the theory is that the treasure at the end of the world is functionally a party. Something Joy Boy left so that whoever got there would have a reason to gather everyone, which would explain the laughing perfectly and would be the most Luffy ending imaginable. Theory 92. It's the world. This one came out of a Reddit post and it's cleverer than it has any right to be. The theory proposes that Roger found an upside-down plinth referencing a real 1961 artwork by Piero Manzoni called The Base of the World, a pedestal installed upside down so that the entire planet is technically the sculpture sitting on it. If the greatest treasure in the world is a base with the world on it, then finding it does exactly what Whitebeard promised and turns everything upside down. It's the sort of theory where you can see the person who thought of it going slightly wide-eyed at their own laptop. Theory 93. It's just the truth. The unglamorous option. The treasure is the complete history. The thing the poneglyphs are fragments of. And its value is entirely in what happens when the official record collapses at once. No gold, no weapon. Just a document that ends a government. Theory 94. All blue is made, not found. Sanji's dream is a sea where every fish in the world lives together, and everyone treats it as a fairy tale. The theory is that it becomes true if the red line comes down, because the barrier separating the four seas would be gone, and the water would simply mix, which would mean Sanji's dream and Luffy's are the same event described by two different people, and that neither of them has worked it out. Theory 95. The moon. Enel went to the moon. This is not a theory, this actually happened in a cover story side comic that ran in the corners of chapters while the main plot carried on without him, and he found ruins up there, an abandoned advanced civilization, robots and imagery connecting it to the world below. The theory built on it is that the ancient kingdom's technology came from or went to that civilization, and that the story's biggest lore dump has been sitting in a comedy side strip about a man who got humiliated and left. The theories about Roger getting there first are, in my opinion, a stretch. The ruins themselves are not. Theory 96. The planet has a name and neighbours. From the SBS again. Oda has confirmed the planet is called the Blue Planet, that it isn't alone up there, and that there are 4 colossal bridges spanning the seas, one of which Odin saw, and which is not the one everyone assumed. He named 3 things people had asked about for years, and then declined to explain any of them, which is either magnificent or deeply annoying depending on your temperament. Theory 97. Rox D. Sebek survived and became a quack doctor. Here's the daft one. The theory is that Rox didn't die at God Valley, that he's been alive in the present day the whole time, and that he was Dr. Hiraluk, Chopper's Hiraluk, the cheerful lunatic in the pink hat who couldn't cure anything and drank an explosive formula at the end. There is essentially no evidence. It requires the most feared pirate in history to have retired into terrible medicine on a snow island. I include it purely because somebody sat down and wrote it out properly, and I respect that. Theory 97.5. There's a theory about the ending's final image that I've grown very fond of. The argument is that the last panel of this series will not be a battle or a coronation, it will be the crew eating. Because that's what many arcs actually end on, The fight finishes, and then there's a table, and everyone who was trying to kill each other a chapter earlier is sat round it sharing a meal. It's the most repeated image in the entire work, and nobody counts it as a motif because it looks like filler. Theory 98. The map is a cage. The theory says the Grand Line, the calm belts, and the Red Line aren't natural geography, but a containment system, engineered or manipulated to keep people from reaching the edges of the world, which would recast every navigational nightmare in the series as a security feature. Somebody made the route difficult on purpose, and the difficulty has been doing its job for 800 years. Theory 98.5, small one on Laughtale itself. For most of the series, the island was called Raftel in English, because that's how the early translations handled it. And then Oda gave the official spelling, and it turned out to be a pun the English versions had been mangling for 2 decades. There are people who've been saying Raftel since 1999 and simply refuse to stop, and honestly, fair enough. You don't get to rename someone's childhood by clarifying a romanization. Theory 99. The song is the story. Circling back. If Laughtale comes from the lyrics, then arguably the whole series is a slow performance of a song we heard in full at Thriller Bark. It describes a crew sailing, a wandering journey, a tale told with laughter, and an ending. Brooke sang it for a whale, Luffy learned it as a child, and it's the one piece of culture that everyone in this world, pirate or marine or civilian, seems to know. Before the last one, a few endgame ideas that don't fit neatly into a numbered slot, but are worth having in your head. The Zunesha question first. There's an elephant the size of a country walking across the sea, carrying a nation on its back, and it has been walking for around 800 years as a punishment for a crime it won't name. It can talk. It has been waiting for someone to give it an order, and it recognized Joy Boy immediately. Nobody has explained any part of this, and the story treats it as roughly the 4th most pressing item on the agenda. Then there's what happens to the world afterwards. If the Red Line comes down and the seas merge, the practical consequence isn't a happy ending. It's a catastrophe on the scale of the one that started all this. Sea levels change, coastal populations move. The theory that I find most persuasive about the ending is that whatever Luffy does is going to cost something enormous, and that the story has spent 1,000 chapters showing us the price of the last time somebody did this, so that we'd understand what it means when it happens again. And there's the smaller, sadder speculation about the crew's fates. Oda drew them at 40 and at 60 in an SBS once, across 2 different possible timelines, one where things went well and one where they didn't, which is a strange thing to publish. Most authors don't hand their audience a picture of what failure looks like. Theory 100. The last panel already exists. Oda has said repeatedly and across a lot of years that he worked out how this ends before he'd finished the opening arc, and that the final scene has never moved. He's mentioned telling a small number of people. He's declined to tell anyone else, obviously, and the theory the fandom has built on top of that is the one I'd bet on. If I had to bet on any of these, it's that every apparent detour in this story has been navigation. 109 volumes deep, 516 million copies out in the world, and the argument is that the destination has been fixed the entire time, and the route has just been long, which would explain the christening bottle and the silhouettes and the throwaway line in chapter 5, and a man drawing schematics for a boat's fridge lock in a letters column. You don't leave that much material lying around unless you already know what it's for. The counter-argument is that he's an improviser with an extraordinary memory who's very good at making old material load-bearing after the fact, which is also a skill, and arguably a rarer one. I don't think we'll ever be able to tell the difference from outside, and I've decided I quite like not knowing. Right, that's the 100, and the honest thing to say at the end of a list like this is that most of them are wrong. probably the great majority. Somewhere in the next year or two, Oda will publish a chapter that quietly demolishes 40 of the things I've just spent 2 hours describing, and people will make videos about how obvious it was all along, and then they'll start again. Which is the hobby. It isn't really about being right. If it were, the fandom would have collapsed years ago from sheer disappointment. It's about having something enormous and unfinished to poke at. A story where you can genuinely notice something in a background panel from 1999 and have it turn out to matter. That's rare, and it's most of why this particular fandom theorizes harder than any other I've come across. The other thing worth saying is that a fair few of these will turn out to have been right all along, and nobody will be able to prove who said it first. That's the nature of a fandom this size. An idea gets posted somewhere in 2013, drifts, gets reposted without credit, becomes common knowledge, and by the time the manga confirms it, everyone remembers having always thought so. There are people who worked out the Void Century's rough shape years before Vegapunk explained it and got laughed at for it at the time. They're still out there somewhere, being quietly smug as they've earned. I keep thinking about that thing from the very start of tonight, the question asked in Chapter 1, that's still open now. 30 years is a long time to hold an audience's attention with a question you haven't answered. And the reason it's worked isn't the mystery itself, it's that the man asking it clearly knows what the answer is and has known since the beginning, and has been leaving little pieces of it in the background the whole way. Christening bottles, silhouettes, a song about drinking. I've got a few more of these planned, probably one just on Elbath once the arc has settled a bit, because there's more in there than I could fit tonight, and possibly a proper Void Century deep dive, because I only scratched it. But that's enough for tonight. Nothing here is going anywhere, so there's no rush on any of it. Take care.